Members, we've got a quorum already. So may I now call to order the meeting of the Subcommittee on Waste Disposal, Designated Waste Disposal Facility Amendment Regulation 2013, and Waste Disposal Refuse Transfer Station Amendment Regulation 2013. I would like to welcome the administration and deputations to this meeting. And you can now put on your earpiece. Channel 0 is the floor channel. Channel 1, Cantonese. Channel 2, English. I'd like to remind all the deputations that neither your written submissions nor your verbal submissions will be covered by the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance. I suggest that each deputation be given 4 minutes to address the subcommittee. All right. So we'll invite the deputations to speak first. First of all, from the Civic Party, Mr. Andy Yu. Thank you, Chairman. I'm Andy Yu from the Civic Party. Now we have 4 suggestions with regard to charging waste on the basis of the volume. Now I want to say that at the moment there is little financial incentive on the part of members of the public to reduce waste, and also the business sector has not been doing enough to reduce waste, and so we are of the view that the polluters pay principle should apply. In other words, there should be charging based on the quantity of refuse generated. In fact, we've got 5 suggestions. First of all, prepaid refuse bags should be used for members of the public to dispose of their waste. And this is to give effect to the polluters pay principle. Second, and there should be waivers for certain types of households. This is to alleviate the financial burden of certain groups. Third, the revenue from waste charging should be used for promoting recycling and other environmentally friendly activities. And then fourthly, refuse transfer stations and refuse contractors should set certain fees for the collection of large items of refuse. And also there should be clear differentiation between industrial waste and domestic waste. And then concerning food waste, out of the total amount of waste generated every day, 3,280 tons are food waste. And so we must try to reduce and recover and recycle food waste. There are a number of suggestions. First, there should be a food waste recovery system whereby food waste is separated from other types of waste, and then food waste can be biodegraded. And then we can follow the examples of Germany and other countries, and we should try to encourage organizations to promote food-wise campaigns. Third, for surplus food and food waste, such can be recovered by social enterprises. And then the existing food waste recovery facilities should be perfected, and the public should be educated so that they will dispose of food waste properly. And I've got these suggestions. First, there should be composting plants for food waste, or industrial sites should be set aside for plastic recovery and recycling and the recovery of electronic products, or there should be separation points in the urban area. Finally, we should support environmentally friendly products. The business sector should try to procure green products. And then there are 4 suggestions. First, the government should set a good example in respect of green procurement. And second, public bodies and charitable organizations should be given subsidies for carrying out green procurement. The Civic Party hopes that all these suggestions will be adopted. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Yu. Next, we have Mr. Timothy Choi, the convener for the opposition of or the concerned group or the opposition of the extension of the Cheung Kwan O landfill. Thank you very much. In fact, Cheung Kwan O residents and the Liberal Party oppose the extension of the Cheung Kwan O landfill in any form. We understand that there are these amendment regulations, and we'd like to give our views on waste disposal. We understand that a lot of municipal solid waste is produced on a daily basis. The MSW problem is a very serious one. And the amendment regulation is about the Cheung Kwan O landfill receiving only construction waste in the future. But I don't think this will really fundamentally solve all the problems. Now, we are concerned about environmental nuisance. So RCVs will still be going to the landfill using Wanpo Road. So there will still be nuisance. And then concerning the waste collectors and contractors. Now, it's true that in future, Cheung Kwan O landfill will no longer receive domestic waste. So contractors will have to go to the Sha Tin transfer station to transfer the waste. But still, there should be a sound and comprehensive strategy to deal with MSW. Concerning waste separation, waste recovery, I don't think the administration has really offered us the solutions that we want to see. So Cheung Kwan O landfill will only be receiving construction waste, but I don't think that's going to solve all the problems. In fact, many LegCo members and members of the public do not know that in November, the EPD proposed that in Area 137 Cheung Kwan O, there should be an integrated waste treatment center. Now, in fact, the Town Planning Board has just completed the public consultation exercise. So maybe we can be told more about this project, because according to the amendment regulation, there should be fewer RCVs going into and leaving Cheung Kwan O and using Wanpo Road. But then if there is to be this integrated waste treatment center in Area 137 Cheung Kwan O, then there will still be a lot of RCVs using Wanpo Road and going in and out of Cheung Kwan O. So I hope that the EPD can tell us more about the integrated waste treatment center proposed for Area 137 Cheung Kwan O. And according to the amendment regulation, there will be less or fewer LCVs using Wanpo Road. So I want the EPD to clarify the situation for us. The concerned group adamantly opposes the extension of the Cheung Kwan O landfill in any way, in any form. We want to have a date from the administration as to when the Cheung Kwan O landfill will be closed permanently. Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Thomas Tan from the Hong Kong Waste Disposal Industry Association. Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. In fact, our members own over 300 RCVs. Now, concerning the diversion arrangements, we want the EPD to give us some detailed information concerning the proposed diversion arrangements. And some of the existing transfer stations have already reached capacity. And we understand that an additional 400 RCV trips, or over 2,000 tons of waste, we have to make use of the transfer stations. So we must make sure that sound arrangements are put in place. And we do not want to cause any nuisance to members of the public. And also, when we go to the landfills, we don't need to pay. But then if we go to, if we use the transfer stations, we have to pay $30 per ton of waste. You may think this is rather cheap, but then an RCV carries about 11 tons of waste. So in other words, $330 per trip, and usually about 3 trips per day. That would mean $990 per day. So for the whole month, we're talking about $28,000. Now, these operators only get about $50,000 to $60,000 a month, and I haven't deducted the cost from this amount, so that there won't be any profit for these contractors. So I hope that there can be a grace period or a transitional period for these contractors to hold discussions and negotiations with OCs and to adjust the collection fees. Because if all the extra costs are borne by the contractors, I don't think the contractors will be able to cope. And I hope that the EPD can hold more discussions with us and give us more time to work out the transitional arrangements. And then we'll need to have the cover. Yes, we are also members of the public. We do not want to cause nuisance to members of the public. But then we only have about 5 to 6 contractors who can retrofit RCVs with the tailgate covers. And then, so we don't know when the tailgate covers can be retrofitted, because there are only so few contractors. And for the small contractors in particular, they will face great difficulties. They may be forced to close down, or their business may be taken over by the larger contractors. And we really do not want to see this happen. Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Ivan Cole, manager from the Construction Industry Council. Yes, thank you. We don't have any specific views on this amendment regulation, Chairman. But we hope that members can take note of 2 points. Firstly, there must be sound planning for the transitional arrangements. Second, there should be sound planning for all the proposed changes. Now, let me say something about the transitional arrangements. Now, in most government contracts, the dump site is specified. And then for private sector projects, we do not know whether dump sites are specified in the contracts. So we hope that you will look at existing contracts to ensure that there will be proper and sound transitional arrangements put in place. And then concerning the dump sites, they will be changed in many contracts. And so concerning the C&D waste, will there be special facilities required? So we are concerned. We don't have the information.
We hope that the authorities will try to understand how C&D waste should be handled. This is about the amendments. On the amendments, I'd like to note the following. For the Construction Industry Council, we would like all of you to understand what the Council is doing to reduce wastes. First of all, the CIC has already adopted high technology or advanced technology to reduce C&D wastes. For example, the construction information model to allow the construction plan to be done better. That is to reduce pre-work wastes. Secondly, how do we reduce wastes? We've commissioned some consultancy firms to assist us to study how to make use of prefabrication construction techniques to reduce C&D wastes, or allow control elements to be in controlled environments and factory environments to be controlled better. Thirdly, about the environment, we've also commissioned a consultancy to assist us to study how to recycle waste glass and waste concrete. To produce substitutes for river sand. Sorry, it's known as river sand substitutes. What are they used for? They're used for the production of concrete or plastering materials, in layman terms. We've commissioned a consultancy to assist us to study how to recycle waste glass and waste concrete. Finally, together with two organizations, we've provided support to the drafting of a report for the submission to the Environment Bureau for reduction, reuse, and recycling of construction materials. We'll offer our comments. We would like the industry and members of the public to provide us with different views on how to handle C&D wastes. Next, to Mr. SIU Tak-hung. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the moment, the administration is prepared to eliminate the old diesel vehicles. The Changquan Oil landfill is due to close. These will deal a heavy blow to the livelihood of the industry. Now, for municipal solid wastes, and most of them are transferred to the West Kowloon refuse transfer stations. If we are to transport the waste to Nim Wan and Tuen Mun, the journeys will be longer. And the transfer station at West Kowloon is already saturated. The facilities there are old. We always see breakdowns and long queues of vehicles. So how are we going to ensure that the RCVs can operate normally? If we are to dump refuse at Changquan Oil landfill, it's free of charge and the journey is shortest. For West Kowloon, the transportation fee is very high. For Tuen Mun, Nim Wan, and Sha Tau Kok, RCVs will impact on the environment en route. Normally, every day, every vehicle going to Tuen Mun, Nim Wan, and Sha Tau Kok, the journey time will take 2 hours more. As contractors, we're of the opinion that this is a disastrous blow. Because if we spend more time on every journey, every day, we'll get 1/3 business less. And costs will rise by at least 40%. For Tuen Mun Yen Wan and Sha Tau Kok, basically their roads are saturated. As for the throughput in West Kowloon, on top of the basic facilities, the transfer station cannot bear the blow. For Chuan Kwan O, it's 400 vehicle trips, about 2,000 tons of refuse. If they are to go to West Kowloon, then for the environment of the vicinity, all these lorry trips will impact hugely on the neighboring environment. As for the basic facilities there, can they bear a doubled workload? And the vehicle trips will pose a major problem. At the moment, we may be able to run 3 journeys per day. In future, maybe just 2. So this will deal a heavy blow to the industry. I'd like to emphasize that the government should comprehensively open all refuse transfer stations free of charge. And then the administration should attach a great deal of importance to imported refuse, which also impacted hugely on our landfills. Thank you, Mr. Siu. Next, Ms. Longchun Sao. Mr. Chairman, I represent the industry. The Chuan Kwan O landfill is to close down. I hope that the government can help us. In terms of fees and charges, we would like future facilities to be free of charge. And the operation hours for receiving refuse should be extended. What are we doing at the moment? My husband drives the vehicle and I help him. So even now, we're unable to cope. If you are to increase the charges, I now have a business of $60,000. If we are to hire a driver and pay him, plus the RTS fees will be out of business, will be driven out of business, and all of us will become unemployed. So please assist the industry. So my request is that the best is to have these stations free of charge. And for the RTS, in the past, I queued up for 2 hours before entering them when Typhoon Signal number 8 was hoisted. Thank you. Please help us. Thank you. Next, Ms. Catherine Yan, President of the Environmental Contractors Management Association. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Concerning the proposed amendments to Southeast NT landfill, which is to receive C&D waste only, we have the following opinion. At the moment, 9,000 odd tons of household waste are delivered to the 3 landfills in the new territories. If Southeast NT landfill is to receive C&D material or waste only, and the other household waste are to go to Northeast NT and West Kowloon or West NT Station landfills, you should consider whether or not their capacity can cope. You should undertake to the public that the environment will not be affected. Otherwise, the public consultation exercise on the incineration plan will be hugely affected. Northeast NT and NT West landfills should be improved in terms of the road network in the vicinity, the odor on the roads, and so forth. Suitable facilities should be put in place to allay public worries. More should be invested in the facilities so that they can cope with the extra household wastes and to attain the highest environmental protection standards. The government should announce the residual lifespan of these 2 landfills for public reference. The proposed amendments are that the government subsidize the installation and retrofitting of The metal tailgate cover and wastewater sump tank, we support them. The government should ensure that the equipment and devices operate normally. But then the government should define who should bear the responsibility if anything is to happen. As for the fees and charges of RTSs, for Hong Kong East and Hong Kong West, the fees should be reduced from $40 per ton to $30 per ton. We're of the view that there are insufficient incentives for refuse collectors in order to improve the mode of operation of the existing landfills. The administration should address the traffic flow issues en route. Now, commercial waste to the tune of 3,000 odd tons per day will be entering the refuse transfer stations, thus impacting on traffic and transport. There should be proper assessment of the impacts and of sufficient measures to allay public worries. As for the capacity of 2,500 tons of commercial wastes, at the RTS, it's already saturated and there are long queues of refuse collection vehicles. The facilities should be improved with more investment such that while handling the commercial wastes, the environment can be maintained. Costs will rise for the industry, so for the contracts for the contractors, there should be improvement in the terms and conditions so that the contractors will continue to provide quality service. Thank you, Ms. Yan. Next, Mr. Gary Young, Honorary Secretary of the Hong Kong Association of Property Management Company Limited. Mr. Chairman, for the two proposed amendment regulations, for those proposals on NT Northeast landfill, in terms of environmental hygiene, the regulations will make actual improvement on the environment, particularly odor. So in principle, we can support the regulations. Our association would like to put forward the following four proposals so that the public impact will be minimized under the regulations. Before a proper plan is worked out for the handling of municipal solid waste, we should promote segregation at source and the recycling and reuse of C&D materials. At the same time, it is imminent to expand all the three landfills, but other means such as incineration should also be considered. Secondly, for Southeast NT landfill, when refuse are streamed to other landfills, the administration should make sure that there won't be huge impact on transport costs, including the journey distance and the journey time, which may lead to increases in costs and may be transferred to the public. And in terms of arrangements, the vehicles should avoid the busy roads and busy hours. Transportation by water or by sea should be considered, but costs should also be considered. Besides, for the proposed improvement for the hopper of tailgate unit and the sump water tank, we support them in principle, but sufficient subsidy should be offered to the relevant construction companies to avoid they transferring the cost to the public. Fourthly, for the journey time and the queuing time for dumping of refuse, we expect the situation to worsen. So there should be streamlining to other landfills and RTS, and the FEHD should ensure that RCVs visiting major housing estates and the frequency should not be affected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yang. And then Ms. Patricia Chong from the Green Council. Do you have anything to add? No? I understand that the administration is going to give a response to the comments made by the deputations. Yes, Mr. Chen. Yes, thank you. I've jotted down as many points as possible. I'll try to respond to them all. Now, a deputation asked whether the waste diversion plan was our only solution to all the problems. The answer is no. In May, a blueprint was put forward by the Secretary for the Environment, and the blueprint contains reducing waste at source, promotion of recycling, waste to energy facilities, and hygienic landfilling, and so on and so forth. So there are all these objectives laid down, and there is also a clear timetable. And so the waste diversion arrangements represent only one of the measures outlined in the blueprint. So I just want to say that the proposed diversion is just one of the ways to disposed of municipal waste. Now, for the sand landfill, in the future, it will only receive construction waste. And the odor and environmental nuisance caused by MSW can be reduced as a result. And then the RCVs will be covered, and then there will be wastewater sump tanks. And as a result, the impact on the residents can be further reduced. In fact, for the 3 landfills, in fact, we've said many times that they will reach capacity soon. For the sand landfill, it will have reached capacity by the end of 2015, and for the other 2, they will reach capacity in 2018-2019, and so we will give a further report to LegCo members this year, and we will again propose to extend the landfills. But then we're not going to rely solely on landfilling to dispose of MSW. In fact, we're also proposing to construct waste-to-energy facilities. So extension of the landfill and also the construction of waste-to-energy facilities are part and parcel of our blueprint. And of course, we have other proposals like stepping up recycling and reducing waste at source. I understand that the industry is concerned about the diversion arrangements to be put in place. Now, the FEHD is responsible for the collection of waste, and of course, there are contractors working for the FEHD. FEHD will be holding discussions with its contractors on the actual diversion arrangements. For example, the routing of the RCVs, and also as sand landfill will no longer be receiving MSW, then the contractors' RCVs will have to go elsewhere. And in fact, last time we showed members a table showing the future routing of the FEHD's contractors RCVs. So after this, the amendment regulations have been passed, then we will ask the FEHD to start formal discussions with its contractors on how the contract terms should be amended. But then we can't start the negotiations on the change to contract terms yet because the amendment regulations have yet to be passed. And then for private contractors, we have had some preliminary discussions with them. Now, even if the amendment regulations are passed by LegCo, the commencement date has yet to be fixed. Some deputations have already said that they will need time to hold discussions with their clients, with property management companies, with OCs. And also contractors need to know which transfer station they will be going to, West Kowloon, Sha Tin, or transfer stations on Hong Kong Island. So they will need to have discussions with their clients. They will have to review their modes of operation. And so we are suggesting that the fees charged by our refuse transfer stations be lowered from $40 to $30. And then at the moment, the Sha Tin transfer station is not open to private contractors. But then because of the implementation of the diversion plan, we have decided to open the transfer station to private contractors, and the charges will also be $30. And in fact, this is on the low side. Now, some have said that they hope that they can make use of all the transfer stations free of charge. But then for some of the transfer stations, as some deputations have pointed out, there are already rather long queues during the busy hours. And in fact, last time, I showed members a table on the utilization rate of transfer stations in the urban areas or near to the urban areas. And for the Sha Tin and the West Kowloon transfer stations, and in fact, they don't have too much surplus capacity. So for the heavily utilized transfer stations, now some FEHD RCVs are using these transfer stations, and in future they may be using other transfer stations, or they may go straight to the landfills, so as to make available some capacity at these popular transfer stations for private contractors. But at the moment, the utilization rate of the transfer stations is already rather high. And so if we waive the usage fee, then there won't be adequate capacity for these private contractors. And that's why we have decided to strike a balance. The charges will be lowered to $30. At the moment, there are already queues during the busy hours, and if we waive the usage fees, then the situation will worsen during peak hours at these transfer stations. And also, we are now carrying out some alteration and improvement works at the transfer stations. Some old machinery is replaced by new ones. We are trying to increase the efficiency of our transfer stations so that the operation of these transfer stations can be stepped up. In fact, we're having such works at the West Kowloon transfer station. We hope that the works can be completed as soon as possible. And we will implement the diversion arrangements after the improvement and upgrading works at transfer stations have been completed. And during this period, or during this period of time, contractors can hold discussions and negotiations with their clients. And so when the upgrading works are completed, then the operation of the transfer stations will become speedier and more efficient. And then concerning improvements to RCVs, I'd like to thank the industry for its support. In fact, the subsidy plan has been approved by the Finance Committee, and so the subsidy plan or the subsidy scheme will be launched as soon as possible. We are of the view that there should be a timetable, and so initially we have decided to allow 9 months for applications. In other words, RCV owners need to submit applications within a 9-month period, and they need to apply to the EMSD, and then the improvement works do not need to be completed within the 9-month period. We understand that there aren't too many contractors or garages carrying out such improvement works. And the commencement date of the amendment regulations has not been fixed yet. So after all the RCV owners have applied to us, and after they've got sufficient time to complete the improvement works, then we will fix the commencement date. So in fact, when the commencement date is depends on the progress, and of course we need to come back to LegCo on the commencement date notice. With regard to the diversion plan, I want to say that the commencement date of the regulations also depends on whether the our proposal to extend the landfills is approved by LegCo. So I think that's my response. Thank you. All right, thank you very much. Our colleagues can now ask questions. Ms. Emily Lau, Mr. Pun Chiu Peng, and Mr. Tony Chair. Anyone else? And also Ms. Elizabeth Quat. Right. 5 minutes for each member, including questions and replies. Ms. Emily Lau. Yes, thank you, Chairman. I thank the deputations for coming today. We do understand your concerns. We know that the extension of our landfills is a controversial issue, and then in fact there is a proposal to build an incinerator, and I'm sure there will be a lot of discussion in society. And then the administration has said that there will be problems if the landfills are not extended. So where will the refuse go? We really don't know. Now, anyway, Mr. Tam said that the operating cost would go up. It's true that the transfer station charges will be lowered from $40 to $30. But then according to Mr. Tam, even if the rate is $30, the cost will be about $1,000 a day. And at the moment, there's no need to pay. And then if the contractors ask the OCs to bear the extra cost, then you can expect that the extra cost will come from the the members of the public. And I want a number of deputations have suggested that the usage fees for transfer stations be waived. So what is the financial implication? I want to know from the administration. And then according to the administration, at the moment there are already queues at transfer stations. And so I want to know at the moment the queuing time is about 2 to 3 hours. How long will the queuing time be in the future? And then it is said that if the fees are waived, then there will be longer queues. So can I ask deputations whether you would agree to that?
And will you extend the operation hours? Of course, if you extend the operation hours, everything will become more expensive. Particularly for the small traders, the government should consider them. They don't want to be eaten up, so to speak, by the big contractors. And now, if they cannot earn a livelihood, what would happen? They may use their RCVs to block the electrical complex or the RTSs. Well, the new year is approaching. We don't want to have that sort of scenarios. Mr. Chairman, for the RTSs, particularly those near to the urban areas, the contractors are already using them. 20% of the waste are transported there. Not for Sha Tin. We have to vacate certain facility workload or capacity for them. As we said, there's a capacity limit. Now, West Kowloon has not reached its capacity. Still, there are already queues. So if we are to provide services free of charge, we have to consider whether the capacity of the RTSs can cope with all the refuse collectors. We do have reservation over that proposal. Of course, the waste diversion plan will have to consult the industry. Changes will have to be made because costs may rise, so we'll discuss with industry to see how the impact can be minimized. In the long run, for the fees and charging policies of the RTSs, we have to adopt a comprehensive approach in our deliberation. In future, unavoidably, for the waste collection policy, we have to consider the existing charging structure of the refuse transfer stations. Should we consider that together with the overall levy structure for refuse collection? But for the waste diversion plan, we're willing to discuss with the industry to see how we can minimize its impact on the industry. As for the operation hours, at the moment, refuse transfer stations, including the one in West Kowloon, do not see so many vehicles throughout the whole day. From 8 a.m. to 2 p.m., we have the rush hours, so it's mainly in the daytime. The RTS is open up to 11:30 p.m. at night, so there's sufficient time for the industry to use them. We're willing to provide more information to the industry, including the rush hours of these refuse transfer stations. In designing their routes, the contractors can avoid the rush hours so that the stations will have sufficient capacity and time to handle the wastes. At the moment, we propose retrofitting for the stations such that when the RCVs are inside the stations, the workflow can be expedited, thus indirectly shortening the waiting time, the queuing up time. Mr. Chan, can you explain the operation hours of the industry at the moment as well as the operation hours of the transfer stations and draw a comparison? May I defer to Dr. Chan, my colleague? Mr. Chairman, normally at our landfills, we undertake how the industry can smoothly dump their waste. Between 20 minutes to 30 minutes, they'll be able to dump their wastes, depending on which station they go to. Yes, at West Kowloon, there's a long queue, and we've already noted the phenomenon mentioned by the industry just now. Amongst all the transfer stations, West Kowloon is most frequently used. It has reached 90% capacity, and from 8:30 to 2 p.m., the station has its rush hours. We're now updating the hardware, for example, the machines inside the stations. So, we'll try as far as possible to make improvements. For the hardware, machines, compaction, machinery, etc., once they are fixed, the efficiency can be enhanced. And by then, the queue will not be as long as now. So for the West Kowloon Refuse Transfer Station, it's not a typical example. For other transfer stations, there's no queuing up time as long as in West Kowloon, which is 45 minutes. Mr. Poon Siu Ping. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just now, some members of the industry said that they are worried that upon the implementation of the proposals, costs will rise and queue-up time may become longer. It seems that the government has not kept in close liaison with the industry. All along, we thought that a lot has been discussed between them. However, in our deliberation, we discovered that there's no special consultation with the industry, and the government has not understood the industry well. Just now, the industry told us that they're even worried that their business might have to close. As for the retrofitting of RCVs, under the proposals, the drivers would be penalized if anything is to happen. In fact, the vehicle owners should be penalized instead. Can you reconsider the proposals under the regulations? Because the refuse collection vehicles owners have the biggest say. So we would like the government to tell us why the drivers should be penalized. As for Area 137, we're told that there would be an integrated center. Is it true that there's such a plan? If so, what is the latest development of this integration center? I'll defer to the Deputy Director and then the deputations. Deputy Director. Mr. Chairman, concerning the waste diversion plan, we did consult the industry. But we've not gone into the details yet, such as rerouting, fee structure, and so forth. But we did consult with the industry. Just recently, I had communicated with the representatives of the industry. The honourable member was correct. If the waste diversion plan is really to be implemented, we'll definitely consult the industry before the plan is to commence. I can give that undertaking. As regards penalty, at the last meeting, some members mentioned this. In my impression, some members supported our proposed model. The regulations would be applicable to the users of waste disposal facilities. So we'll impose a levy on the users. That's why the users will be penalized. And users include the drivers as well as individual operators. When RCVs enter our waste disposal facilities, the drivers have to ensure that they meet our requirements and their vehicles are operating well. Well, some people will say that the retrofitting may not be proper, and therefore owners should be held liable. Well, we hold a different view. I'll defer to members. As for Area 137, just now some participating deputations said that at the moment for Area 137, we don't yet have a plan to have an integrated waste disposal facility. But I noted that in recent media reports, some lay organizations have applied to the Town Planning Board. And it's an application under the Town Planning Ordinance, but that's not a government proposal. Mr. Tam Chi Wah, would you like to supplement on your views about punishing the vehicle owners or the drivers? Mr. Thomas Tam. I think honourable members have spoken our mind. The charging system will impact on our business. At the moment,将軍澳landfill is free of charge. If you impose a charge on us, we'll definitely transfer the charge on the public, because individual operators would definitely transfer the costs to members of the public. I think you should plow the costs back to the LTSs, because you are talking about fees and charges anyway. As for whether or not the vehicle owner or the vehicle driver should be punished, we have the big transport operators and the small operators. For the small operators, usually the boss is also the driver. 60% of our operators are actually operated by the drivers themselves. The drivers themselves are also the bosses. So apparently they are to bear all the liability. Now, if a driver does not do something leading to an owner being punished, just like the case of a driver breaching traffic laws, the owner should not be punished. But of course, if safety belts are not provided, then the vehicle owner should be held liable. So both parties should be liable, depending on the situation. Ms. Yan also mentioned penalty for drivers and owners. Do you have any supplementary information? Well, a driver may not be the owner. If it is a driver come owner, then of course the owner should be punished because he is also the driver. For the new equipment, it's the responsibility of the vehicle owner. Don't place the responsibility on the driver. Otherwise, the owner will adopt a wishy-washy attitude. The driver is earning a livelihood by driving the vehicle. If the owner does not modify the equipment, there's nothing the driver can do. So the owner should be held liable. Then the owners will be more enthusiastic in meeting the requirements under the government's policy. So the owner should be held liable. Well, Transport Department, if the owner refuses to retrofit the vehicle, what will happen? Of course, the driver has his own responsibilities. If he does not meet certain requirements, he should also be held liable. Well, there are three aspects here. Well, there should be a metal tailgate cover and a wastewater sump tank, as we said. Well, after installing these devices, certain objectives should be met. For example, there shouldn't be any nuisance or hazards. Now, all these are set out in the regulations. Besides, the owner has to ensure, or the owner or the And the driver should ensure that the devices are sound. So when a vehicle enters our facilities, the user should be held liable. But we don't define whether or not it is the driver, the owner, or the driver cum owner. Thank you.
多謝主席㗎。
Mr. Tony Chair. Thank you. I thank the deputations for coming today to give us their views on waste disposal and the amendment regulations. I agree with many deputations that a comprehensive strategy should be worked out in relation to waste disposal. Now, the administration has said that, in fact, there are many measures in the blueprint to deal with the problem, and I hope that this blueprint can be implemented as soon as possible. And then as to who should be penalized, the driver or the owner, now, I think it's a difficult situation. Now, of course, if the owner doesn't carry out the improvement works, then of course he should be penalized. But then we do see RCVs which do have covers, but then the covers are not used, and so who should be held responsible? So I think we should look at each and every case individually. I understand that the administration wants the waste collectors and contractors to use the transfer stations because at the transfer stations the waste is handled, and then the waste can be transported by sea. But then, and that will help, of course, to reduce the nuisance. But then it's true that the fee will be lowered to $30. But then additional costs may be incurred by the contractors because the RCBs may have to travel further, and as a result, diesel costs incurred by the owners will go up. And then I'm also worried that some transfer stations may prove to be rather popular, and as a result, many RCVs will go to the transfer stations, and people living near those transfer stations will suffer from a lot of nuisance. And then if certain transfer stations prove to be very popular among the private contractors, then can the FEHD ask its contractors to use other transfer stations which are not so popular? Now, I think a reply has been provided in a paper from the administration, but then perhaps the administration can now give a verbal response. As to which transfer stations the private contractors will use after the diversion, we've provided members of a paper, and the paper is dated the 23rd of December. Now, for Island East, Island West, and Northland South, these transfer stations are less popular, and the FEHD contractors will be diverted to those transfer stations. We don't expect private contractors to use these three transfer stations, despite the fact that they will no longer be able to use the sand landfill. And so FEHD contractors will use these less popular transfer stations, and there will be and for these private contractors, 60% of them will go to the West Kowloon transfer station, 20% to the Sha Tin landfill. So in other words, there will be capacity in these two or rather transfer stations, rather West Kowloon and Sha Tin, released by FEHD contractors. So for FEHD contractors now going to the West Kowloon transfer station, they will be asked to, if they will still use the West Kowloon transfer station, adjust the hours of the trips so that there will not be long queues at the West Kowloon transfer station. Thank you. I think we'll go on to the written reply from the administration later. Ms. Elizabeth Quat. Yes, thank you, Chairman. Now, the administration keeps saying that there will be sufficient capacity at the transfer stations, and so we need not worry. But I think they are to a certain extent conflicting themselves. Now you want to encourage the contractors to use transfer stations. You do not want to see too many RCVs on the roads causing environmental nuisance. Now, in fact, we earlier on visited the Sha Tin refuse transfer station, and the capacity is very limited. And then for the West Kowloon transfer station, we are told that there is only 10% surplus or residual capacity. So is it that these transfer stations will be able to cope with the extra RCVs? And how many RCVs will be going to these various transfer stations? And then you said if no fees are charged, then more RCVs will go to the transfer stations, and as a result, the queues will be longer. But then at the same time, you are saying that you can ask contractors to adjust the hours of their trips, and there will be sufficient capacity to deal with all the RCVs. So please clarify your position. And then I've got a question for either Mr. Tam or Ms. Yan. Now, according to the EPD, the busiest hours at West Kowloon transfer station is 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. and the queuing time can be up to 2 hours. And we're told that there are no queues. Or the problem is not so serious at the other transfer stations. So I want to ask Mr. Tam or Ms. Yan, why your contractors are not going to the West Kowloon transfer station at the during the non-busy hours? At the moment, there are over 400 trips to the Ascent landfill, and many of these trips will be absorbed by or will go to the West Kowloon transfer station or to the Sha Tin station, right? Yes, Chairman. In fact, on the 23rd of December, we gave members a table, and Table 2 is, says that for West Kowloon, there is this residual capacity of 170 tons. And then there will be an extra 900 odd tons. So the total capacity available at West Kowloon, 1115 tons. And then Sha Tin at the moment, 202 tons per day residual capacity. And then because of the diversion of FEHD contractors, there will be an extra 135 tons. So in other words, Sha Tin station, 337 tons of capacity after rerouting. And then Northland Town, Island East, Island West, the capacity will be increased. So for RCVs going to Ascent landfill, 1,800 tons of MSW are sent to the Ascent landfill by private contractors. And with the diversion, the 1,800 tons will be diverted to different transfer stations, including West Kowloon, 60%, and then 20% Sha Tin, and then the remaining 20% to the other transfer stations. Mr. Tam? Ms. Quad wants to know why contractors or choose or prefer 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Now, in fact, at the moment, most of the users are FEHD contractors, and usually we collect waste during business hours. And in fact, private contractors appear in the night time. And in fact, at the moment, most private contractors go directly to the sand landfill. They do not go to the transfer stations. So from 4 p.m. to 11 p.m., basically, we do not, or the private contractors do not use transfer stations. But with the diversion, the situation will change. So after the FEHD contractors' vehicles have left, then the situation during the morning peak hours will be better. And private contractors only appear at the transfer stations at sunset. This is because, and also about 11 because private contractors collect the, say, food waste from restaurants. And so private contractors appear after sunset or during the morning, because many private because the contractors operate after midnight, and then the waste has to be disposed of in the morning, and so in some cases we do compete with FEHD contractors in the morning hours. And I want to say that FEHD contractors usually go there in the morning. Ms. Yan. Yes, I entirely agree with Mr. Tam. In fact, this is the operation timetable of the industry. Right? Can the department supplement here? Yes, Chairman. We will provide such information to the FEHD, and FEHD will ask the contractors to avoid using the transfer stations during the busy hours. And it seems that that there is room for improvement. Now, because I think we can FEHD can ask its contractors to adjust some journey hours. Ms. Emily Lau. Now, sorry, Chairman, I was not in the conference room for a while, and I don't know whether this question has been asked or not. I think there should be cooperation and coordination between FEHD contractors and private contractors. Now, these small private contractors are struggling for survival. They do not make a lot of money, and it would not be good if they have to queue up for hours at the transfer station. So I think there should be mutual accommodation. And then the administration says that there will be MSW charging. I believe the public will accept that. But now we're talking about a special arrangement. The sand landfill will no longer receive MSW, and as a result, some contractors will have to use the transfer stations. Now, you can't expect the contractors to absorb the extra cost, so the contractors will definitely go back to the OCs. But in fact, our overseas visitors have asked why we allow people to make use of our landfills free of charge. So I believe we need to have MSW charging. But what about the charges for the use of the transfer stations? I want to hear them explain this.
Any views from the deputations? Mr. Tan? All along, we would like to start with concepts. Landfills are collecting fees, so they're recovering costs. During this exceptional time, no fees should be collected. Even if you want to collect a fee, you should allow us a grace period during which fees will not be imposed. Say, by 2015, if we enter an RTS, we have to pay a fee. Then we can tell the OCs that the fees are actually collected by the government, not by the operators. So if operators cannot afford the fees, the only way out is to close their businesses. Ms. Long? Ms. Lau's observation is very strong. If suddenly you change from a free service to a charged service, then even though you're reducing the fee from $40 to $30, I may have difficulties. I may have a contract that is only run for 1 month or 3 months, and the contract may last for 2 to 3 years. I cannot terminate the contract, so the pressure is on us. Many small waste collectors can only abscond then. All right, you impose a fee on me, then I close my business. Yes, you have to handle environmental protection, but at the same time, you have to consider the livelihood of the industry. If you want to impose a fee, you should give us a longer grace period, such that you can make known to the public that a grace period or an exemption period of 1 to 2 years will be given to the industry. Given that timetable, we can talk to the OCs and our customers. We can tell the OCs, for example, the situation such that the OCs will tell the small property owners the fees will be increased. Well, I understand the point. In the next contract, you'll increase the fees. But why is it that some operators opt for the free refuse transfer stations or landfills, or some of them opt for the free landfill, others for the RTSs that collect a fee? Mr. Tan, take, for example, plastic boards collected at container ports. Usually, our customers are willing to pay a price, but that's only a small percentage of our customers. Well, basically, where the FVHD contracted vehicles and where we should go are designated by the FVHD. So in future, even if we are to be rerouted to refuse transfer stations occasionally, you have to give us a grace period so that we can get accustomed to the routing, the locations, etc. Some operators might not have registered yet, particularly for the small operators. They very seldom go to refuse transfer stations. Mr. Chen, what about a grace period? At the moment, we have not considered an exemption period. But of course, for the shut-in RTS, in the past, it was only used by the FVHD contracted operators or collectors. Before the commencement of the regulations, can we give an adaptation period to the private collectors going to shut-in so that they can get accustomed to the situation there? We'll have to further consider. But for Sha Tin and West Kowloon, we don't have much residual capacity. In West Kowloon, 90% of the capacity has already been reached. For Sha Tin, there's a bit more. But if we are to consider free services at our LTSs, not just SENT landfill will have our CVs diverted to other landfills and LTSs. The workload during rush hours and the queuing up time may increase rapidly. Well, we may not have problems with the FEHD contractors, but for the private collectors, if they are using refuse transfer stations at the moment, they may opt for those facilities offering free services. So members have to consider that possibility. The deputation said that they would like to have a grace period for adaptation purpose. We'll listen to the views of the industry and see whether we can do anything about the commencement date. Dr. Elizabeth Quat for the second round. Any more? If not, I'll draw a line there. And then so much with the deputations. Dr. Elizabeth Quat. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to follow up on the charging issue. Just now, the Deputy Director said that if the services are provided free of charge, all vehicles may be rerouted to the facilities with free services. But I don't actually see a direct correlation between the two aspects. Is it that you're considering that all LTSs will provide free services or vice versa? I think you are mixing that up with the waste diversion plan. So first of all, I'd like to ask the deputations whether or not the phenomenon described by the Bureau will occur. That is, all vehicles will go to the free facilities. Deputations? Mr. Tam? Or your colleagues? Well, Mr. Chairman, I don't quite agree with the administration. Why? They are saying that free services may pose a problem, but in fact, operators will opt for the nearby facilities. Well, 200 out of the 400-odd vehicles are from Hong Kong Island. They are now going to Taiwan. There are no incentives for them to go to West Kowloon. So, you need not worry that the workload of West Kowloon may increase. And then if all refuse transfer stations provide free services, there will be incentives for all collectors to go to a nearby facility. They won't go to West Kowloon. Ms. Long? I fully agree. At the moment, all Hong Kong waste go to Chung Kwan O landfill, which is free of charge. So in future, if the LTSs on Hong Kong East and Hong Kong West are free of charge, there's no incentive for them to go to West Kowloon. Dr. Quat? Mr. Chairman, I think there's something illogical in the remarks of the administration. The administration has to provide us with strong justifications for the proposed fee of $30. Say they have to tell us why the $30 would be effective in terms of diversion. Today, I'm not convinced. Just now we heard from the administration that if all facilities are free of charge, all collectors will converge in West Kowloon. But in fact, the market principle is that the operators will opt for the nearest facility. And then for the long term, even for household wastes, if a fee is to be imposed, then if you are charging the collectors $30 now, in future OCs may impose another levy on the small property owners that will lead to even greater resentment amongst the public. That's even worse. So you have to think about this more thoroughly. Today, I can't understand why you need this $30 of levy. As for whether the driver or the owner should be penalized, the logic is very simple. If there's something wrong with the vehicle, the owner should be punished. If the operation is problematic, the driver should be punished. That is, if the equipment and devices are not in order, the owner should be punished. But if the driver improperly or illegally operate the devices and equipment, the driver should be punished. Deputy Director? On the whole, the present policy is that polluters should pay. So we have a charging system, basically. If we are to provide free services, we may not be able to reduce waste at source. The refuse transfer stations charge different fees at the moment. That's why we suggest that for some of the RTSs, the fee should be reduced to $30. It shows that under the diversion arrangement, we don't want the differences in fees lead to collectors choosing their stations. As for Southeast Empty Landfill, the private collectors on Hong Kong Island now opt for sent landfill rather than the refuse transfer stations on Hong Kong Island. And in future, we think some of the operators will opt for the Hong Kong East RTS. And the principle of polluters pay should be maintained. Because even if you call it free services, they're not actually free. They're actually paid by taxpayers. And just now, some deputations supported the approach of taking landfills and refuse transfer stations together in our future charging policy, rather than reducing fees and charges. A supplementary remark. Our wastes concentrate in West Kowloon, Wai Kwai Ching, Tsuen Wan, Mong Kok, Kowloon City, Sham Shui Po, Wong Tai Sin, and Yau Chim Mong. They're nearer to the West Kowloon RTS. Therefore, the so-called free services mentioned by the deputations will cause all these collectors and waste to go to West Kowloon, not Hong Kong East and Hong Kong West. For Hong Kong West, we now propose a reduction from $40 to $30, in the hope that even Kwun Tong collectors may cross the harbour. In fact, these wastes are generated by Hong Kong Island, but because the Tseung Kwan O landfill is free of charge, those wastes will go to Tseung Kwan O, and the operators will incur a higher cost as well because of a higher fuel cost, for example. So we would like the industry to take this opportunity to adjust their routes so as to strike a balance. So it's not really free. Otherwise, all waste will go to West Kowloon. I think we've had a very detailed discussion. I hope that the department will provide us with a detailed written reply on views expressed today, including the concept of a charging policy for RTSs and justifications. And then for West Kowloon and Sha Tin, you propose improvement measures. How can you ensure that the queue-up time will remain the same such that the operations will not be affected? And of course, will the department consider transitional arrangements such that even after the enactment of the regulations and even if we agree to the principle of polluters pay, the operators can effectively handle those contracts that have not yet expired?
So we would like to have detailed responses from the administration, and I thank the deputations for coming today and for telling us about the operation of the industry. So thank you very much for coming. If you have further comments or if you have certain questions or doubts, you can write to us after the meeting. So you can now be excused. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All
right, members. At the meeting held on the 23rd of December, we, in principle, completed clause-by-clause scrutiny of the regulations. We've just heard the views of the deputations and also the responses of the administration. Now, the administration has provided us with a paper CB1 6391314 bracket 03 or bracket 04. So perhaps we can now go through this paper. All right. Enforcement against leachate dripping from RCVs. The administration, please. Chairman. Now, we don't have a breakdown concerning leachate dripping from RCVs with proper equipment and without proper equipment. But I want to say that during the period in question, there weren't too many cases of leachate dripping. Maybe during the period, many of the RCVs carried construction waste to the landfill. But then we are of the view that with the proposed improvement measures, the odor will be reduced. Now, concerning RCVs without metal tailgate covers, odor is a problem, although they may not have been prosecuted for leachate dripping. Yes, please continue. The improvement measures, the equipment. Now, let me say something about the wastewater sump tank. Now, the guidelines merely specify the minimum capacity. The industry takes into account its operational need and decides on the capacity. And even if the capacity is 150 liters and the waste load is 11 tons, still this ratio is not high. So most of these tanks do have sufficient capacity. Last time members asked whether there could be alert systems concerning a full sump tank. And we understand that in fact there are already such devices. Dr. Chan, please. Yes, Chairman. I want to say that there are a series of holes or gaps at the bottom of the hopper. And wastewater will start to appear at the bottom of the hopper when the wastewater volume in the sump tank reaches about 80% of its capacity. Now, last time members asked whether sensors could be installed in the tanks. But then we are talking about water from waste with very high concentration. And even if sensors are installed, it's very likely that the sensors will break down because the leachate, the liquid, may contain a corrosive content. But then it has been suggested that a sight glass be provided. Of course, the sight glass is transparent, and as a result, the driver can see that the tank is already full, or will be full very soon. Thank you. All right, I think I'll pause here. So, concerning enforcement against leachate dripping from RCVs and equipment of RCVs, do members have any questions? No? Then we'll move on to the next point, charges of refuse transfer stations, RTSs. Yes, please. In fact, the deputations have given a lot of comments. Deputy Director, in fact, we've already explained the situation to members in detail, and we do not want to depart from the polluters pay principle, and we do not want to, because of the waste diversion plan, waive the fees now paid by private contractors. We believe that about 20% of the users of the transfer stations are private contractors, and they are paying fees. And if because of this waste diversion plan, they no longer need to pay, then does it mean that all contractors, all users will not have to pay? And as a result, contractors not using the transfer stations at the moment may be attracted to the transfer stations, and as a result, for stations which are already very busy, like the West Kowloon station, will there be more users, longer queues, and so this is for members to consider. Right, Ms. Emily Lau, 3 minutes, including replies. Yes, of course, we need to deal with the polluters pay principle. But then here we're talking about a special situation. The contractors have to at the moment, the contractors are going to the landfills. They don't need to pay, but now in future they will have to pay $30 per hour per trip, and you can't expect them to absorb the extra cost. Some of them may be forced to close down, and some of them will have to approach the OCs. And of course, the OCs will be very unhappy. Yes. Now maybe you can impose the charges when the current contract expires. But I think what you told us is irrelevant. We are not against waste charging. We're not against the polluters pay principle, but we're talking about a special situation, and these contractors will have to incur extra costs. Now, I understand that FEHD contractors and government RCVs do not need to pay. Why? this is a waste collection service provided by the government, and the service is provided by the FEHD. And so we do not charge another government department. But for private collectors or contractors, I want to say that different transfer stations or different stations charge different fees, and in fact some of these stations are charging $68 per ton, and we're now proposing to lower this to $30, so you can show the government's commitment. In fact, even if we charge $30, we are unable to recover the cost. In fact, this fee has not been adjusted for a decade, and so in fact we're not able to recover the cost. But I want to say that if we waive the charges, then private contractors now going to the to the said landfill, as well as private contractors not using these transfer stations may be attracted to these transfer stations, that we may not be able to cope, especially during the busy hours. Deputy Director. Now most of the collectors on Hong Kong Island now go to Sand landfill. So will say RC or contractors in Tuen Mun decide not to go to Tuen Mun landfill and decide to use the refuse transfer stations? So according to the deputations, in fact, it's desirable to waive the fees. Chairman, now we are analyzing where private contractors now going to the Sand landfill will go to in the future. But of course, we'll try to carry out an assessment on the impact of this proposal on contractors in other districts. Yes, Chairman. Last time, may I refer to Table 3, Island East, Island West. So we believe that we're talking about 16% of the waste collected on Hong Kong Island. Now the waste is collected from on Hong Kong Island, so it's quite likely that the waste will go to the 2 transfer stations on Hong Kong Island. At the moment, the waste is not going to the 2 transfer stations because the Sand landfill is free of charge. And in fact, it's nearer to use the 2 transfer stations on Hong Kong Island. So there is every incentive for the contractors to transport the waste to the 2 transfer stations. Thank you. All right. Ms. Sit Ho. Thank you. Now, because we really do not want contractors to have to incur losses because of the passage of the amendment regulation. So please do some calculations for us, including tunnel tolls and so on and so forth. Now, because at the moment the contractors have to use the Eastern Harbour Crossing, they have to use the Cheung Kwan O tunnel, and of course they need to pay for the fuel cost. So please do some calculations for us, so that OCs and the private contractors know the situation. So I think OCs as well as the contractors need to know the full picture. Deputy Director, yes, we'll try to provide such information. And yes, we'll have discussions with the industry.
At
the end of the day, after the implementation of the waste diversion plan, the industry has to reroute their vehicles in order to calculate their costs. We'll have to follow this up with the industry. We had previous consultation with them and will continue to do that so as to minimize the impact. As for the commencement date, they asked for a transitional period. As I said, if the regulations are enacted with member support, the commencement date can be worked out later, such that private collectors can resolve their difficulties when they reroute their vehicles, because we really don't want to see any strong public reaction or resentment. As for the contractual obligations and so forth, whether or not there's flexibility for us to have some room for maneuvering so as to minimize the impact on them, we can discuss. Mr. Chairman, for the routes of the operators, if they concentrate on Hong Kong East so as to offset costs, then the impact would not be huge. But if they are to go to Hong Kong East and then Kowloon East before reaching Tseung Kwan O, the impact would be huge. So sufficient consultation should be done first by the government. Dr. Elizabeth Quat. Mr. Chairman, for the charging policy, I believe the administration's estimation or assessment is rather rough, so it is impossible for us to assess the impact of the diversion plan. I believe they have to communicate further with the industry. I think if you communicate with them sufficiently, you'll be able to grasp how their vehicles will be routed, and then you'll be able to give us more exact figures and such that we can pass a better judgment. So rerouting has to be discussed with the industry further. Deputy Director, yes, we've undertaken to further communicate with the industry. All right, let's move on to items H, I, and J in relation to leachate disposal. Now, for the Sunwater tank, Mr. Chairman, the charging principle is that we base on the weight of the vehicle when it enters the station and the weight when the vehicle leaves the station. If a vehicle disposes of the sewage or wastewater inside the station, that would be reflected in the outweight. But of course, the disposal cost for 300 liters of wastewater would not be huge. So the incentive would not be very huge. So the existing disposal arrangement is good, because private RCVs will be encouraged to dump the wastewater inside the transfer stations. When an RCV enters an RTS, operationally, it is difficult to weigh the vehicle before it enters the station, because at the moment, the vehicle will be weighed at the in-weight bridge. If wastewater is dumped inside the station, if it is to be weighed again outside the station, the feasibility is not high for busy stations like West Kowloon, because for, say, an extra $10, there's no incentive for the vehicle to queue up again when they leave the station, because the queuing up time may be long. So I don't think that will be supported by the industry. All right, collection of wastewater. Any more queries from or inquiries from the deputations? No? I think the industry is most concerned about the enhancement of the facilities at RCPs, because they would like to know whether they have alternative options rather than out beyond RTSs. For the mobile compaction machine, the waste would be carried away by RCVs. So in terms of facilities, RCPs don't have matching facilities to collect leachate. And very often RCPs are very near to residential structures. If you want more wastewater collection facilities at RCPs for other RCVs, we are worried that the neighboring residents may not welcome that, because more RCVs may be going in and out of these RCPs, and the facilities at the moment cannot collect leachate. So for the moment, that is not a feasible solution. Colleagues, any questions about this issue? If not, the subcommittee has actually asked the government for a copy of the proposed amendments. A paper has already been tabled. The legal advisor received the paper rather late, so it will take us some time to verify the consistency of the drafts. Members, do you have any further questions? If not, we'll ask the legal advisor to verify the relevant versions to see whether or not they're consistent. And then we will have a final version. Mr. Chairman, I don't have any question, but I'm speaking for a third round. The EPD has a lot of subsidiary legislation under its ambit, but I'd like it to follow our rules of procedure. I think papers should be submitted at least 2 days in advance. Don't submit papers every time at 2:30 p.m. only, and our legal advisor cannot go for lunch. So they should, as far as possible, observe to the agreement that papers should be submitted 2 days in advance at least. Yes, Ms. Sito's point is good. The government should follow what we have agreed. Members, concerning the contents of the regulations, do you agree to the contents of the regulations? If so, that is, if you all agree to the amendments, I'll say something about the timetable. The scrutiny period has been extended to the 22nd of January. If members would like to move any amendments, the deadline will be the 15th of January. So on the 15th of January, I'll submit the subcommittee's report to the House Committee. So members, please be reminded that the deadline for moving amendments will be the 15th of January. Ms. Emily Lau? Mr. Chairman, just now it seems that the officials undertook to consider certain issues and come back to us. We mentioned the charging system, for example. I agree with Dr. Elizabeth Quad that they had to consult with the industry duly. Well, we have to clarify everything. Well, unless we reject the regulations, they will proceed. And then that will become a reality. The RCVs may besiege the electrical, and then Mr. Chairman or the electrical president may say that everything was in order. So I'm worried that even if the regulations are enacted, they don't know how to enforce them. There may be long queues. Housing estates may see a rise in waste collection services. Deputy Director, we've consulted with the representatives of the industry. Of course, at those meetings, they did air their views. I noted that some representatives of the industry said that they would accept the implementation of the regulations, but they would like a grace period from the government. Now, these are enforcement details. As I said, if members support the regulations and are enacted, then for the commencement date, we can work better. We can allow room for them to provide better ancillary facilities, in particular for the Sha-Tin RTS, which has not been used before. We can give them a trial period. Now, these are enforcement details. When we communicated with the industry, they did not say that if the regulations are enacted, there would be strong reaction. So we'll embark on mutual communication and to make good ancillary arrangements. Ms. Emily Lau, Mr. Chairman, I'm not asking for another meeting. Now, after this meeting, they should talk to the industry again, and they should try as far as possible to agree with the industry on the arrangements. Then the government should give us a paper on exemption, feasibility for the industry, etc., etc. So we should have a paper from the industry. So if the paper is all right, no problem. Otherwise, we'll have to call them back again. The Secretariat can tell the government that we should have a written paper from the government, and we should tell the industry that the regulations may be enacted in electrical next month. And then we should have a paper from the government. If we disagree to anything, we must call an urgent meeting, emergency meeting. Well, after this public hearing, there may be further views. Well, in fact, I have actually prepared to have another meeting on the 6th of January, next Monday. On the 15th of January, I have to submit a verbal report. Now, what about the 6th of January, next Monday, between 2:30 p.m. and 4:30 p.m.? Members, will you be available to have another meeting to scrutinize the paper from the government and decide whether or not we should support the enactment of the regulations? Deputy Director, will that be all right for you? Yes, we'll discuss with industry as soon as possible and submit a paper for the meeting, and then respond to views expressed at this public hearing. So no problem for the 6th of January. Members, what about the 6th of January at 2:30 p.m.? Mr. Chairman, I won't be available. Well, I think we'll fix the time later. So we'll try as far as possible to scrutinize the formal response from the department again before the 6th of January. We have to talk to the industry and then submit a paper. We may not be able to get the paper ready before the meeting. The paper may have to be tabled. Well, we'll try to submit the paper before the meeting if we finish consultation with the industry. Otherwise, the paper will be tabled. Well, we'll fix the date of the next meeting later. Mr. Chairman, if it is to be the 6th of January, the government will not have sufficient time to talk to the industry again and submit a paper. Can we have the next meeting on the 9th of January? Well, we'll fix the date later. We'll have to see whether rooms are available. So before the 10th of January, when we'll have a House Committee meeting, we'll strive for an opportunity to scrutinize the paper, such that members can feel more comfortable with any amendments to be moved. Mr. Chairman, they should call the deputations again. I think the government should give us a paper at the next meeting and we'll see whether deputations have any further views. All right, so much for this meeting then. We'll meet next week again, and we'll fix the date later. Thank you very much.